Hello friends, happy Monday. Welcome to another episode of Learn with Lo. I know I always say I'm going to start at the top of the hour and then I get busy chatting with my awesome clients and sometimes it just doesn't happen. So welcome to Monday. I'm super excited to continue our series here. Last week I launched our Know Your Numbers series. And in this Know Your Numbers series, I wanted to walk you guys through a little bit of a behind the scenes sneak peek of what it's like to go through what I call a functional wellness consult with me, which really just involves some initial labs and a full consultation together to kind of jump off somebody's journey, because I feel like a lot of times, especially in more of a conventional medicine standpoint, some people don't get access to all of the labs that they want to see or want ran. And so, or they don't get like a full in-depth interpretation. And I'm very passionate about the fact that I feel like you don't need a PhD to understand your body, right? We should all feel educated. We should all feel empowered and informed to be able to look at something like a lab panel and know what's up, right? Not that we know like the nitty-gritty details or exactly what to do about all of it. That's where we can definitely loop in a healthcare team to help us. But I think there's so much education and empowerment that gets involved with learning how to look at labs and knowing kind of what to suss out from labs that you maybe had recently. So we're always here at the Lowdown. We use every symptom, every lab marker. We use it as a clue. And I like to use those clues to lead us closer to understanding each person's unique picture of their own health, right? So, and then together we use those labs and those symptoms and the health history to really start to connect things around nutrition, the microbiome, mind-body medicine, environmental influences, all the things that we know contribute to us feeling a certain way or having certain health outcomes, whether they're good health outcomes or poor health outcomes. We can really start to craft a personalized and customized plan that empowers you to be able to really achieve those optimal health goals, right? So whether it's reversing hormone imbalances, working through metabolic disease patterns, chronic gut issues, autoimmune dysfunction, skin issues, I mean, you name it, that's where I'm dedicated to help you finding your root cause. And a lot of times that really helps by starting with lab testing, right? So we're here to educate, and today we're going to be really taking this Know Your Numbers series to the next level and start talking about cholesterol, right? And when we think about cholesterol panel, a lot of times in a more formal sense, it's called your lipid panel, right? Lipid is a scientific name for fats that roll around in the bloodstream, right? So we're going to be really thinking about what does a cholesterol panel mean, what all goes into a full lipid panel. If a provider were to order that for you, what does that look like? And then more so than anything, I want to kind of roll through what does a functional interpretation of a cholesterol panel look like, more so than just, oh, cholesterol looks great, come back next year, or, oh, your cholesterol is high, here's a medication or a statin for it. It's like, how are we really talking about what cholesterol means in the body, and how are we using cholesterol and lipid panels as a clue for what the body might be trying to communicate to us, right? Because I'm a believer that high cholesterol, as an example, that's not a root cause, right? High cholesterol or low cholesterol or high triglycerides or high HDL or low HDL, whatever it might be, all of those are clues, right? The body's doing that for a reason. And it's not something like, oh, the high cholesterol is the cause. The high cholesterol is the symptom of something bigger, right? So that's where we really get to have some fun and start to learn what that cholesterol panel actually means and come up with a game plan. So I think, like I said, as we kind of dive into this cholesterol panel, there's nothing that's more honestly kind of controversial in the space, unfortunately, just because we have this really big spectrum of practitioners out there that are either more conventional minded and conventionally trained and thinking still a little bit more old school of what we used to understand cholesterol being. And then we kind of have this like new wave of understanding around cholesterol as well too, and what that can kind of determine. So it's about finding the middle ground, right? It's like, okay, what are we looking at? What does science tell us about cholesterol and what it means in the body? But then also, what are we starting to understand as that symptom of cholesterol starts to show up? So what the heck is cholesterol? What is a lipid panel? What's it responsible for, right? So cholesterol is probably one of the most misunderstood molecules in the body. it's not just related to heart disease, right? That was kind of our old school understanding of it. We thought that, oh, cholesterol, and when it's high, it starts to formulate and congregate and clog up our arteries of our heart, right? And that means if cholesterol was clogging our arteries, then if we eat less cholesterol, that should fix the picture, right? And it's like, wow, if only that were so simple, right? And we've learned time and time again that actually it's not that simple, and that we've maybe been blaming the wrong player of the game. Like, even though cholesterol is present at the scene of the crime, doesn't mean that he was necessarily the victim, or he probably is the victim more so than the perpetrator. Let's put it that way, right? So as a fun fact, only 50% of heart attacks happen in individuals with high LDL or high cholesterol pictures, only 50%. So there's tons of heart attacks and heart disease risk factors that happen every year in individuals that have completely normal lipid panels according to conventional medicine. So we have to think bigger, right? So what is cholesterol? What does it do? So cholesterol, number one, plays a major role in overall cellular function, right? Kind of a fancy way of saying that when we think about our cell walls, cholesterol makes up the cell wall. So it is always determining like what gets through, what doesn't get through. We want our cells to actually be like soft and fluid. Sounds kind of weird, but without cholesterol, those cells would be like really stone-walled and really rigid. So things wouldn't flow in and flow out of the cell in a really like smooth pattern. So we depend on cholesterol for overall cellular function of getting important things into the cell, getting things out of the cell, and overall just preventing what we would call like oxidative damage or aging to the cells, right? Nothing ages faster than a cell that has poor cholesterol distribution, right? So we know that cholesterol is not all bad. It forms the cell walls and it protects the cells, and it's very like anti-aging and anti-oxidant to have a good fluid cell wall. Cholesterol also plays a major role in bile synthesis, right? So when we think about bile comes from the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and it's released in response to dietary fats. So without bile, we don't digest and absorb fats well. Without bile, we can't eliminate metabolic waste or toxins. And if we can't digest and absorb fats, then we're not going to digest and absorb fat-soluble vitamins either. So individuals that struggle with poor bile production usually have chronically low levels of like vitamin D. They might struggle with low iron. They might struggle with low B12. Right? So it's like cholesterol is one of those things that is absolutely important in synthesizing bile. Bile does a whole sorts of things for us and for our healthy digestion, right? And then last but not least, cholesterol is a major player in hormones, right? We could not have fertility or any reproductive ability without cholesterol because we would never be able to make hormones, right? All of our sex hormones, especially steroid hormones, which are going to be your like pregnenolone, progesterone, cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, all of those hormones are made from cholesterol, right? So we're over here like blaming and kind of putting cholesterol into this like bad demon category of like obliterate cholesterol at all costs. He's a bad guy, right? When in reality, if we really zoom out and look at it, it's like, that's interesting. Why would the body be producing higher levels of cholesterol, right? Cholesterol in and of itself is an anti-inflammatory molecule, right? That's what it's trying to do. It's like the body senses that it needs to make more for a reason. It's like, man, I need to make more because there's some oxidative stress going on. I need to make more because the body is demanding more hormones be produced. The body needs more cortisol. It's under more stress, right? It's like we're starting to see all of these things and it's like, the body is smart, right? The body, the body is doing this for a reason. Fun fact, 80% of the cholesterol in your body is made in your liver. 20% comes from your diet. So the body is not dumb, right? If it needs to make more, it will make more. If you eat less dietary cholesterol, it will just make more, right? It's not going to let that situation just fall into the cracks, right? The body knows that cholesterol is so important. So if it needs more, it's going to make more. So that's where we know that we've kind of debunked the whole connection to like eggs and red meat are bad, right? It's like, of course, there's going to be genetic variability. There's going to be bio-individuality. Yes, of course. But I think we've kind of debunked that cholesterol is this bad guy when it comes to heart disease, and to eliminate him from your diet at all costs, and to obliterate it with prescription medications at all costs, and start to really look at cholesterol as a sign. It is a sign of inflammation. And now it's our job then to go inflammation hunting. Like, where is the source? Like, stop treating the symptom, because the source of the fire is still there somewhere, and it just shows up in other parts of the body. So you can take statins and things like that to lower your cholesterol, but it's like the fire still exists. So it's going to show up elsewhere. It'll show up as high blood sugar. It'll show up as diabetes. It'll show up as autoimmune patterns. It'll show up as high blood pressure, right? The inflammation still exists. So that's where, when we think about cholesterol, we want to really like find the source. Don't treat the symptom, right? So knowing what cholesterol all does in the body and all of the good things and benefits it does for us, we want to start to think about like working with this cholesterol picture and using it to stay curious, right? What is that cholesterol trying to tell us about the overall body, right? So when we think about, in my world, I call it the low down method. What's the low down method for interpreting and looking at cholesterol labs? We first want to talk about like what is all inclusive into like a lipid panel to really give us like the most information. So for sure, you're going to be seeing like a total cholesterol, an HDL, which is high density lipoprotein, or LDL, which is a low density lipoprotein. You'll probably also see a triglyceride reading as well too. And then I would say two bonus features of really understanding what we're looking for is definitely having something like an inflammatory marker, maybe like a high sensitivity C-reactive protein marker as part of your lipid panel, and for sure a fasting insulin, right? And I'll talk about why this is important, but the more and more that we're finding, it's like, is cholesterol the player in this heart disease game, or is that cholesterol really only dangerous in the presence of also high insulin or blood sugar dysregulation, right? So we're starting to see a lot of these things connected together, and it may not be enough just to like blame cholesterol for this picture. So when we look at, like I said, the full lipid panel, yes, you're going to get cholesterol, triglycerides, HDL, LDL, but I also would love for more individuals to be able to see like a C-reactive protein and definitely a fasting insulin, right? So let's start off by, just as we dive into these labs and kind of like what your optimal reference ranges are here, let's make sure that we understand that cholesterol serves as like a soldier, right? It's a soldier in the body's military. And the military really is our immune system, right? Like there's like the captain, the general, I'm going to butcher all my army terms, but that is going to be the immune system. And our cholesterol are really just the soldiers that get to go out and execute the immune system's mission. I got the word. It took me a second, but execute the immune system's mission, right? So the function of cholesterol, LDL, HDL is kind of like cleaning up any of the post-immune defense, like for infections and toxin removal, right? Like these things are there to kind of like clean up the system, right? So total cholesterol levels, let's just start there. So total cholesterol, optimal cholesterol levels are between 160 and 200, right? You'll probably hear a variety of different reference ranges where some people only talk about like high cholesterol. I also talk about low cholesterol. Call me in the minority of practitioners, and that's totally fine, but I'm gonna always be talking about too low of cholesterol as well too, because I see it almost just as frequently as I see too high, right? So when we think like total cholesterol 160 to 200, total cholesterol less than 160 has actually been shown in studies to be shown related to stroke, hemorrhage, cognitive decline, and depression, suicide, right, rates. It's like, oh my gosh, like low cholesterol is associated with all of those things. It's like, yeah, well, think about it, right? We're not able to create hormones. We're not able to digest and absorb fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin D, and we know how impactful that is for things like moods and neurotransmitter production. Vitamin K is also a fat-soluble vitamin, and that is known for clotting factors, right? So you start to connect the dots. You're like, oh yeah, too low of cholesterol, like there's probably a lot of oxidative stress going on. There's a lot of inflammation going on. There's a lot of where did I lose my train of thought? Low hormone production going on and low fat soluble vitamins going on, right? So we always want to take that into account. It inhibits the ability to absorb proper nutrients and produce hormones, right? So too low of cholesterol, not good. So below 160, it would kind of get my attention there. Too high of cholesterol would be like above 200, right? We just need to go inflammation hunting now at this point. Like, why would the body be making more cholesterol? It's doing it for a reason. We don't need to just shut that off, but like, why, right? More on this later of what those potential sources of inflammation could be, but at least kind of thinking about like too low, too high. 160 to 200 is a great range for that. Then when we think about cholesterol in and of itself, cholesterol is, like we said, it's a fat, right? It's a lipid. And so what you might know from days back in chemistry is like fats and water don't mix well, right? So fats can't just roam around independently in blood because blood is mostly water. So these cholesterol molecules, they need a taxi, right? They have to hop on a taxi in order to get shuttled around in the bloodstream. So those fats, cholesterol, have to hop onto a taxi in the form of a protein. So we have these high density lipoproteins called HDL or low density lipoproteins called LDL. So if you think about it, cholesterol are the passengers and the LDL or HDL, those are the protein taxis that then take the cholesterol where it's needed or pulls it away from the tissue and takes it out for removal, right? So two types of lipoproteins. We have your low density lipoprotein. Ideally, we want to see that below 120 on a lab test. LDL takes that cholesterol from the tissue to the liver to get discarded, right? Or excuse me, LDL takes the cholesterol from the liver to the tissues. Then we get the other way around where we have the high density lipoprotein. Ideally, that's between 50 and 80. I don't want it too low, but fun fact, I also don't want it too high, which whoever hears about HDL being too high? Rarely, right? But it's a sign. Then the HDL actually takes cholesterol from the tissue to the liver to be disposed or discarded of, right? So LDL ideally less than 120, HDL between 50 and 80. If we have HDL, like I said, that's too low, that's usually, like I said, that good or that healthy, happy cholesterol, usually due to high amounts of like metabolic disease, usually high amounts of insulin resistance will contribute to those low HDL patterns. Now, high HDL patterns, like HDL above 80, I'm like, where's the infection? Where's the toxin? Where is the dysbiosis? Like, what is going on? The body like is almost mounting an immune response to that like high HDL level. So that also gets my attention as well, which a lot of practitioners would never say somebody to someone that has like HDL in the 90s. I'm like, I wouldn't necessarily like praise that and be like, wow, your HDL is so great. I'm like, where's the infection? What is the immune system trying to respond to right now? Then we get into our triglycerides, right? Triglycerides are our body storage form of fats. So same thing, triglycerides can also kind of ride around on some of these lipoproteins and get delivered throughout the body. But a triglyceride, in its name, it kind of sounds like like three. So it's a sugar molecule with 3 fatty acid tails attached to it. Triglycerides are our body storage form of fats, so they are roaming around in the bloodstream looking for somewhere to park, right? So high triglycerides usually tell us the body's in like a fat storage state. Low triglycerides tell us that the body's a little bit more in a fat utilization or a fat burning state, right? So triglycerides, ideally, I like to see those below 100 in the triglyceride category, not 150, which is kind of more of a standard reference range. I like to see those triglycerides below 100. Even more impactful is the HDL to triglyceride ratio. You definitely want to see a 2-to-1, if not a 1-to-1 ratio. If I can get your triglycerides to 70 and your HDL to 70, yes, like that's a good 1-to-1 ratio. Really, really strong sign there. The higher that triglyceride to HDL ratio, so if your triglycerides are 180 and your HDL is 30, that's a surefire sign of insulin resistance happening, right? Some bigger metabolic disease risk factors happening there. So if you want to kind of know your insulin resistance score or an indirect marker of insulin resistance and insulin function, especially if someone did not run a fasting insulin on you with this panel, you can just take the ratio of your triglycerides to HDL. It's not perfect, but take that ratio, and if it's more than a 2-to-1 or not quite between like a 2-to-1 and a 1-to-1 ratio of triglycerides to HDL, there might be some underlying insulin resistance patterns going on there. The additional markers I love to see, like I said, would be that high sensitivity C-reactive protein. We obviously want this number as low as humanly possible, as close to 0 as possible. And then we also want to see the fasting insulin. Fasting insulin, that's a growth promoting hormone, right? So a lot of times if there is some like high cholesterol and high insulin, we know that that partnership together can lead to some of that more plaque buildup or that atherosclerosis kind of picture. Not necessarily cholesterol by itself, but cholesterol with some of that like metabolic damage, inflammation, high insulin. So high insulin to me would be anything over 7. Ideally, that fasting insulin stays below 7. So I don't think it's as common though that most practitioners aren't running a fasting insulin. So if you don't have that, then like I said, you can always refer to like a triglyceride to HDL ratio or seek out a practitioner that actually runs fasting insulin. That could be impactful too. So knowing all of this, like total cholesterol, HDL, triglycerides, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, fasting insulin, like we see this and we maybe see some signs of cholesterol dysfunction, like what should be our next steps? Go inflammation hunting, right? It's like the goal should be resolving the initial inflammatory picture, not the response that happens after the inflammation. Like that just puts us behind the 8 ball, right? So some things that we need to be considering. Number one, because I know everybody's going to mention it, genetics. Yes. Is there certain genetic predispositions to certain cholesterol patterns? Absolutely there is, but doesn't impact epigenetics, right? So even if you have a genetic disposition to it, you can determine based off of your lifestyle factors and nutrition factors how much or how little of that genetic predisposition you actually express in your genetic makeup. So don't let that be like the number one, like, oh no, I just have to roll over and die because I got really bad genes when it comes to cholesterol. It's like, no, you can absolutely maneuver that. And the takeaway message isn't just eating less red meat and eggs. I've had plenty of individuals that increase their intake of red meat and eggs under, like I said, a controlled environment, and they actually saw their cholesterol levels go down. So riddle me that, right? So the first things we need to think about are potential source of inflammation from lifestyle, right? Of course, we have to talk stress. The more cortisol, the higher cholesterol. You're going to see that every single time, right? So don't try to just do this through diet alone. We have to also think about stress. We also think about sleep, right? Sleep is a huge one. We also think about caffeine intake, alcohol intake. We think about screen use and time, right? All of those things, especially caffeine and alcohol, those are all processed by the liver. And cholesterol is also made in the liver, right? So we have to really think about liver and liver detoxification. And the biggest time we detox is during sleep. Right? So lifestyle is going to be a big one that I talk about with people. Obviously, I'm going more in depth with my clients about these things based off of their picture, but at least we know that in that situation, like these are all factors that we have to talk about when we come with cholesterol. Inflammation in general. So big one here being blood sugar balance for sure. Blood sugar highs, blood sugar lows, those are definitely going to be part of the inflammation picture. We also think about like not just when you're eating or how you're eating, but what you're eating too. So like really adopting more of an anti-inflammatory diet in that sense, which is rich in proteins, rich in fiber, rich in minerals, polyphenols, all of that good stuff. And like I said, a anti-inflammatory diet is not a low-fat diet, right? Do not get those two confused because, like I said, only 20% of our serum or blood cholesterol is from our diet. 20%. So that's not a huge contributor to it. We have to think what's being made in the liver. That's what the body is regulating mostly. We also have to look at things like potential insulin resistance patterns and how we want to reverse those. Some individuals actually have trouble with their cholesterol, not just high cholesterol, but low cholesterol because they're also dealing with some sort of body burden, whether there's chronic infection, dysbiosis, toxin burden, leaky gut, your good old intestinal permeability, allergies, food sensitivities, and intolerances, like all of those things are part of the immune system, right? So the immune system gets activated, immune system gets involved, and all of a sudden we start to have some cholesterol issues as well too. The other one that goes without saying is also hypothyroidism. We see those two very closely related as well too. So lots of different hormonal influences, lifestyle influences, inflammation influences. These are the types of like detailed workups that I'm talking about with individuals when it comes to cholesterol, not just like, oh, here's a statin. It's like, but where's the fire? Where's the inflammation? Because that's probably leading us down a bigger scope and a better domino effect for so many other symptoms. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, cholesterol lowering medications are absolutely necessary. I absolutely practice in conjunction with some of those things sometimes. I'm not here to diss on those, but it's like they're not addressing the underlying inflammation issue. And they can, though, be part of, like I said, a bridge solution as well too. I tend to use a variety of like nutraceuticals, supplements in my practice in lieu of prescriptive strategies in here. So I love a good red yeast rice complex. I love a good CoQ10, high dose omega-3s, even some pro-resolving mediator support in there. Certain probiotics, like some lactobacillus strains of probiotics, can be really helpful in managing cholesterol as well too. So there's lots of, like I said, different nutraceutical strategies, but also want to couple that with the nutrition and the lifestyle strategies that we know are going to help us really identify what's the underlying source of the inflammation, right? So always think cholesterol, think inflammation hunting. It's an anti-inflammation or an anti-inflammatory molecule to begin with. So it's responding to something for a reason. We just have to figure out what that reason is, right? So if you haven't had an opportunity to get a full cholesterol panel, or like I said, you're interested in getting more of a functional wellness consult, don't hesitate to click the link in my bio. That will take you to my website where you can schedule a consultation, and that process will start with ordering some labs for you and having the opportunity for us to really sit down and dive in together of what that game plan forward might be. So hopefully, like I said, talking about and diving into this cholesterol conversation was helpful for you guys today. Be on the lookout for additional series for our Know Your Numbers coming next week. Happy Monday.